I think, Bongani, you must do for us.
Yeah.
Is introduce Prof.
Yes.
And Prof will introduce, because I realized as we were speaking, interesting tensions.
No, aware.
Yeah, who Prof is.
It's quite interesting actually, because he's unique actually in the academy, because he writes about. He will start from from in a sense the 18th century, early 18th. You write about numbers. Write about Mkabai, Tingan, all the way to Soweto, 1976.
Yeah.
Like basically, he writes about the 200 years of South African history. In a sense, that is quite extraordinary. I try from the 1800s to the 1900s, but he goes at least a century ahead of me, in a sense, in what he writes about.
Not in literal age.
No, in literal age.
It does look like it's a century ahead.
Actually, these two books, this one and this one, about what you've just said.
Yeah.
This one and this one.
And yeah.
I got, Professor Ndlovu gave me the Union of South Africa and the Soviet Union. An interesting correlation. These are unions.
Yes.
In a sense.
In a sense, yeah.
But he did this deliberately because of the debate, Jeremy.
Oh yes,
and I.
Yes,
well, I don't think Jeremy was debating me, but I had written something which evoked the origins of the Native Republic.
Oh, the Native Republic Thesis, yes.
Yeah, which the book is based on an important archive of the Communist International.
Yes. Yeah.
But this is 1910 to 1961, the two unions.
Yes.
In that sense, the Union of South Africa is older than the Soviet Union.
Yes.
That's my argument. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that is
the ANC is older than the Communist Party.
Yes.
But you get people arguing that the Communist Party influences the ANC.
The Communist Party of South Africa.
That was my battle.
The Communist Party of South Africa.
No.
The Communist Party.
Even today. But by that time, the people who decided to form the ANC in 1912 are quite aware what is the question about.
Yes.
But we are told that, no, it's only the Communist Party which made these ones conscious of the issue about what is the... But they were not even yet born. They are born in 1921. In 1917, it's just the revolution. They come into being as a CPSU. Communist Party in 1921.
5 years after the formation of the ANC.
But the others by...
The Russian...
the Russian revolution.
Official.
The revolution, that's true.
Yes.
After the revolution, and ours also come into being. But you are telling people who have been around then, by 19...
The defeat of the Tsar.
That's true.
February. But Prof, maybe then I was doing that deliberately, Bongani must say.
That's what
I'm happy. I'm happy to introduce him actually, because I do think, other than the purposes of this thing, he has not been given the recognition that I think he deserves, just as a historian. I would just look at these books alone. Let's see.
And
this is not just.
They are for me,
this is
but
just.
I say, Prof, let's meet to discuss, and then
there's always a book for him for every topic. For every topic we want to discuss with him, he comes.
When I meet him next week, he will want a review of all of them. I don't know where I find the time. But please proceed. Yeah.
No, Professor Sifiso Ndlovu. He's one of the extraordinary historians, actually, that Africa has produced. What usually happens with historians, they will focus on small periods. They become specialists, for various short periods. His scholarship spans literally the 2 centuries of modern South African history. In a sense, he has written about, as I said before, Bumbazi, has written about Kabai, Labotsibeni in Swaziland, but also he has written about the history of the ANC, the history of the South African Communist Party, the Soweto uprising in 1976, and there is a book about that here, and I think it makes him uniquely qualified. Not to talk just about the history of the ANC, but also about the history
of our people. I do think maybe this is an opportune time if Flex, you could bring the whole volume of Sadet, because I think just to foreground what type of work just the whole volume. Yes. It's not actually the whole volume here, but
isn't that one the top one?
Yes. So,
and by the way, just that
the one at the top on Tavern page.
So,
and just that's that volume.
Yes.
Dr. Ndlozi,
and possibly building blocks, ne?
No,
not building blocks.
But just this volume as well.
Yes.
Because I don't think
this project. Yes, this project.
Actually, there are 18 books.
There's 18 books.
We only have 2, 4, 6.
Yes. Yeah. There's 18 of them.
And there is no academic in South Africa, friend, who has done something of this project.
This is an important project. I think we must keep it here on the table.
I really think we need to.
Yeah, let's keep it here on the table.
There's no scholar who has done work of this magnitude.
And this is a sideshow, obviously, relative to this. But very important. And how many people here?
54.
54. John Strimlau, Ben Churok, Chris Landsberg, Amim Pungwe, he was an ambassador in Tanzania, to LB Sex, to Daud Tegiso, Andile Ngaba, Jonas Kwawa, Welile Nhlapo, Gloria Serobe, Joel Neshitenze, you name them. All saying what they think of President Mbeki. Yes. Anyway, Prof, we I think it's a nice introduction.
Then I introduce Prof. Ngqulunga.
Well,
not really.
If we can populate the table like this.
I'll say something in passing.
Yes.
I just wanted to say to that, for me to be able to do my work, I just don't work in isolation.
Yeah.
I have to read other literature that is available out there, because you certainly think that when you were at universities and when you were doing your bibliography and your reading, coming across a name like Ngqulunga was...
But wasn't there Ngqulunga in Flak Plus?
I'm trying to say...
There's a funny joke about it.
Okay.
I'm trying to say... Whenever you were doing your footnotes and your bibliography, there were no African authors. Authors like Prof. Bernard Makosezwe Magubane, whom I worked with because the original SADC, stuff was headed by him. I worked under him. His work was banned, so we couldn't access it. So post 1994, it's not a coincidence that Prof. Ngqulunga's work on the ANC is late. It should have existed pre-19. But it was going to be banned. It was going to be banned. So I is one of the people that I make it a point that I read his work.
Yeah.
Because it has suddenly come to my notice because I've worked under Prof. Makubad. And I know that they share a background in terms of being sociologists, but they're sociologists of a special kind.
Historical.
They are historical sociologists.
And I'm a political sociologist.
You see, in fact,
well, in other respects,
yes,
but mostly I'm just causing a lot of trouble.
Yeah. But they are scarce. The historical sociologists are scarce and very few, including Prof. Makubane's daughter, Prof. Zine Makubane.
She's very brilliant.
She's well. So it means to me, therefore, historical sociologists are brilliant.
No, I agree. And I did this exercise to basically say to all of us as the audiences, particularly as African scholars, African thinkers, there are actually Black professors.
Yeah.
And you can fill up who are alive.
Yes.
You can fill up the entire table with Professor Ndlovu's work. I mean, this is actually very limited. Here, it's a lot of collaboration, you leading scholars of the same generation, of the generation before, generation younger, to try and craft what could be a history towards a democratic project in South Africa, which I think is important, but to inspire everybody out there that we can also be scholars and be alive, and it's not a thing that white people do only. Yeah. But how about we go back to the ANC then? I imagine that 140 years the ANC celebrates this year. Maybe Prof. Ndlovu, you break the ice for us with what are the conditions, circumstances, what are the characters, places that bring about this date we call 1912, January 8, where Africans gather in Bloemfontein. In your book about Pixley, you say there was only one woman in the hall. Charlotte McBride. Anyway, that's what you have. And these people formed this thing, which by institutions, by organizations, both formed by Black and white people, is one of the oldest living social formations. So that would be my, I think, opening question. Frame these places, figures, circumstances, conditions that bring about 1912.
I think we're part of the international world, and we're also going to talk about these issues in terms of progressive internationalism. The ANC is not an exception. If you think about it, if you think about the Labour Party and the Conservative Party in the US, they are in the more than 100 years old. Also, the parties in the US, the Republicans, and their opponents. So to some extent, we as South Africans, we have to be conscious of those histories. You thought in terms of historical consciousness, it's not unique to the ANC. It's an issue that is there. But there's one thing I want to do is to focus on cultural history. If you think about it, as soon as the ANC comes into power in 1994, when they were dealing with issues like discussing public holidays in South Africa, there's one public holiday that remains, that they inherit from the past. And it has to do with 16th of December. And that holiday has a protracted history. And it's still with us. It is called the Day of Reconciliation. How it originates. I mean, we know that when it comes to wars of resistance in our country, in our history as a country, they began the first day when the white person set foot here. And the original freedom fighters, people whom we call the Khoi and the Sire. And those wars of dispossessions are part of the history of December 16. So it's also about land dispossession, which is still with us today. But the fact is, as a historian, the question you have to answer, why focus on the 16th of December when we have a rich history prior to the 16th of December about issues that matter like land dispossession? The answer might be the colonizers had to deal with a formidable character called King Dingane Kasenza. And it led them to fabricate history in as far of coming up with a name of referring to that holiday which they celebrated late 1880s. And they called it the Blood River. And they said that day for them, if you want to discuss the history, the founding myth of the Afrikaners in South Africa as we know them up to this day, the founding myth is based on that. 1838 December, the defeat of King Dingane Kasenza. Up to this day, you can't discuss the past, the history of our white compatriots called the Afrikaners without going back into that. But for us as Africans, if you think about it, it's really not about Afrikaner nationalism. It's about us as a black people and land dispossession and the fact that King Dingane stood up and fought against that. And we do know that they falsified history when they came, that since then, since the 16th of December, South Africa belongs to them because they defeated him. We quite know very well that they didn't. The person who defeated King Dingane is his brother, Prince Mpande, in 1840, the battle of Mbuyiseni Ndlozi. So for us, we have to take our history serious in a sense that we have to go back into those times. You understand why I say they found the myth of the white Afrikaners in terms of the historical record is not correct. Because even by then, King Dingane had been involved in about 6 or 7 battles with them, but he defeated them 5 times. But the 6th battle is the one that is propelled into history. And it becomes a historical myth in terms of the founding of white South Africa. So to a large extent, I just want to take this opportunity thanking you for bringing us here, because the reason why I began with this narrative is that we don't know our past, we don't know our history, So because there's a completely different interpretation from white Afrikaners about what I've just said, and that's what makes history, interesting and serious.
But that would be maybe a half story. But
I wanted to move into the next.
I want to push you to paint for us there's this consolidation of white defeat, which I hear you are mobilizing with this narrative that we have to dispel first and foremost that the founding movement of black on black violence gives advantage to a falsification where white people, specifically Afrikaners, say, they conquered us, when from that moment Mpanze conquers. I get that. But okay, figures, circumstances, places that paint the canvas for the formation of the ANC.
Yes, then when we are busy then trying to make it a point that, because King Tingane says, for the first time in my life, King Shanga didn't have to deal with so many white people in the land. So he has a problem. So as a black person, he has to stand up and fight for his people, because they are coming from all directions. They are calling themselves Voortrekkers. And what they do when the English come in, later in that space, they come up with so many legal tricks, like the 1842 Land Delimitation Commission, and if you do a land delimitation commission, what does it mean? You give the land that is productive to these small groups of people in the region that is in Southeast Africa. That is what we call KwaZulu Natal now. Remember, everything has happened because the Cape is colonized in 1652. We're talking 1842, which is a new event, a historical event there. So there's that history. For me, not to talk about it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But now the problem is, as a black person, now your land is taken away, and then now through the king and the queen in England, Queen Victoria, there's a land delimitation commissions in your region, and then your land is taken away. King Pane is in charge now. So these issues replicate themselves when now, as the colonizers move into the interior, then the only thing that connects us to the international world then is the fact that we are the colony of Britain. But what frustrates issues further is the discovery of the minerals. As this move is from the Cape, is KZN, we move into the interior, then comes Kimberley, gold, and diamonds. Then in that sense, we become part of the international world, because you have to set up mining, you have to set up communications, you have to set up banking, because finance capital comes into the country. But as we are talking about all these issues, therefore, regardless of the fact that the monarchies and the Khoi and the San are part and parcel of the broader challenge that we face, our people decided to modernize their politics, and they started in the regions where now we're part of the mineral revolution to set up different movements. There's one called, I think in KZN, it's called the Funa Malungelo. Well, the name explains itself. It is even formed even before the Natal Congress, African Congress is formed. So our people are conscious politically and otherwise. And they're quite conscious the fact that, this economic dispensation that is, that has been imposed on us, suddenly the question of class, it was race before, it was the land question, the question of class, because what you have to do now, we need workers. When King Cetshwayo was defeated, the glorious regiments and Amabut suddenly were changed into workers. So they have to leave KwaZulu-Natal after 1879 or the Zulu Kingdom when it was defeated. Those warriors suddenly now become workers, and they lost the land, so to speak. So that is why then down the line, the Congress movement is formed, which is provincial, But then we're quite aware that, as I said, I'm specifically focusing on that region in Southeast, which is called KwaZulu-Natal now. Parallel developments happen throughout Southern Africa because you have mine workers recruited as far as Tanzania, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Mozambique. During that time, the late 1860s, and when the diamond mining revolution takes place and the gold was discovered. Now, how can you then claim that in the present, we might be xenophobic? Because at the end of the day, the fact of the matter that when there are migrations moving from Southern Africa, those who move in as mine workers are part and parcel of us then. But in the present, when you discuss such challenges that are still happening, economic migration, you think that economic migration begins in 1994 and therefore it's a new phenomenon. No, it begins then, and we become integrated and we become one, because we're talking about class issues now. Now, those different provincial ANCs then soon merged and form the organization, the South African Natives Congress in 1912. But I'm going to speak about one issue, then I'll leave everything to my colleague to come in. Mm-hmm. When it was formed, it's an issue that is also relevant now in the present. It has what it calls the House of Chiefs, as a structure. Therefore, it's not a coincidence that even today in our parliament we have a structure. But what is unique about this House of Chiefs? Who is there? It is monarchies from Zambia, Lwanika, of the Barots. It's monarchies from Lesotho, Lindsay. It's monarchies from Swaziland. It's King Dinizulu. Zulus is monarchies from Botswana. But the monarchy from Swaziland, people make a mistake. They usually say it's King Sopoza. It's not him. He only takes up power when the Queen Mother is his grandmother. Queen Mother Labotsi, when he passes away in 1921, he only comes. But so what is so special about Labotsi? It means she is the first female leader of the ANC, and she's not necessarily a South African.
This is amazing. I do want to come back to this.
The issues. I want to back. I wanted to talk about.
No, hold the thought there. Because there has to be a proper account of that structure in its maybe a little bit of more detail. I want Prof you to come in, but do the other parts of the places, characters, as well as important circumstances that give rise to these characters gathering in Bloemfontein in 1912.
Because there's 1909.
Yes. Okay.
I mean, I think there is a context. Perhaps to add to what Professor Ndlovu has said, let's go maybe 30, 50 years before the formation of the ANC. Just, really in broad strokes. In South Africa, before the discovery of diamonds and gold, especially gold in 1886, which brings to the formation of Johannesburg. I mean, Johannesburg is 140 years
this year,
which is a significant moment because Johannesburg becomes a significant city, not only in the economic life of South Africa, but in its political life, and also in what the ANC becomes. But South Africa, mostly up until the discovery of diamonds, it's really an agricultural economy.
Well, the entity we now call
the
South
entity,
Africa,
and that is a
that's what I was hoping.
That difference, I'll get there.
Okay,
I'll get there because that has a bearing to when the ANC gets formed. That this, even the political imagination. I mean, the ideas of forming this one entity is not slightly dependent on a South African state. I mean, the United South African state, and that is the reason why the ANC partly gets formed in 1912. But South Africa is an agricultural economy. And so the focus is on the dispossession of Africans, the dispossession of their land. Because as white people move through South Africa, especially into the interior, they are finding these Africans who are occupying fertile land. I mean, and this is what gets dispossessed throughout what we call South Africa today. And I think that is an important context to keep in mind. But who forms the ANC in 1912? I mean, so there are the pockets of educated Africans, but they are linked to missions. And so they form mission communities. I mean, if you go to what we call the Eastern Cape today, these people are clustered around missions. I mean, these Africans. If you go to Natal, you find the same thing. If you go to what was called Transvaal, you find the same thing. If you go to what was called the Free State, you find these small communities of educated Black people, right? And these, in a sense, are the people who form organizations that eventually lead to the formation of what we call the ANC. And how their organizations are formed, this is the second half of the 19th century in the main.
1850 this way.
Now, this is 1850 this way. I mean, there were educated Africans even before that. I mean, people like Tio Soka, right? I mean, Tio Soka has gone to Scotland, I mean, to be educated there even before then. There are people like Feldman Bikicha, I mean, who was born around 1829 or so. So they are they become major political figures. Some get born in the 1850s. I mean, I think J.T. Jabavu gets born in 1859 and he plays an instrumental role. But what is critical about this group of educated Africans who are clustered around missions is because they are clustered around there because that is where they got their education. And in a sense, they develop through institutions and structures that are established by missions. It's quite interesting to me that even when Black people start gaining voice, political voice, they start expressing their demands, I mean, using the forums, the mechanism, the institutional mechanisms that are established through missions. I mean,
Christian missions.
Christian missions. It's interesting if you take, for instance, somebody like John Tengo Chabavu, who starts the first newspaper to be started by Africans. He is a product of these educated Africans, I mean, who grow from the missions. There is something that happens, though, towards the end of the century that is critical to understanding the formation of the ANC. I mean, I think the first, is the defeat of Africans, in a sense, through what usually is called colonial wars. I mean, if you think, Professor Ndlovu has mentioned the defeat of the Zulus in 1879, but the Polities also get defeated in 1879 after the Zulus. The Xhosas, they've gone through wars for a century. Like the 9 frontier wars, they are defeated. So by the end of the 19th century, for all intents and purposes, Africans have lost their independence. And so the mode and phase of
they've lost political systems. They've lost an economic
system. And so confronting white settler colonialism through open confrontation, military confrontation, is no longer, in a sense, a viable option, right, by the end of the 19th century. And that is the critical point to keep in mind. Because then if Africans could not reclaim what they had lost in the battlefield through war, how else
do they do
it? Then they start forming organizations, these political organizations. They start the newspapers. And most of this starts in the Eastern Cape, what we know is the Eastern Cape today, for a very particular reason. I was talking about the frontier wars because they are critical, because it's also because the existence of these mission societies that establish institutions of education, because you can articulate your demands, once you gain the language, the language of rights, the language of access to land,
of representation.
These are the people who get this language, this lexicon of political representation, of making demands and making claims through that. And so I think it is critical to say that before the formation of the ANC in 1912, there were organizations that black people had established. But they were largely provincial organizations, because what we know today as a united South African state did not exist then.
But what existed? Because you're calling it provinces.
Yeah,
my sense is that
they are not provinces.
They are countries.
Yeah, they are countries. Well, in many ways. Well, you have, for instance, what became known as the Boer republics. For instance, the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. This is 1890s. That's what leads to the Anglo-Boer War. Actually, you have the colonies of Natal and the Cape, right? So they are not provinces. They become provinces after 1910. Yeah, so you are right there. But Africans then start organizing themselves politically, using these political boundaries, in a sense, so to speak.
Let me ask a different historical question before Professor Ndlovu comes back. He mentions there's an agricultural economic system.
Yes.
In the agricultural economic system that prevails up to maybe the first diamond mines, there is very little cohabitation of space amongst Africans of different languages.
Yes.
Because I'm trying to arrive at the situation, like what are the circumstances that make people say, no longer Xhosa, no longer Zulu, no longer, we have to fight as a single entity.
Yeah.
What would have been the material condition that would have brought about a conversation like that? Because simply saying they lost wars, you are still discussing them as a day.
Yeah.
But on the defeat, on the battlegrounds, Zulu is losing. Zulu Kingdom loses.
Yes.
It could have organized itself on those terms.
Yeah.
Moving forward in terms of these entities that you are describing.
Yeah.
Or they could have organized themselves as Abatembu, or Bapedi, or Basotho. And yet, in 1912, a conversation like that, this is the significance of 1912.
Yeah. I'm
trying to trace the material conditions that bring about these people to abandon these identities as identities through which you can claim a politics.
Yeah. I think it is important to mention, by the way, that these were not closed-off communities. I mean, there is even evidence that, to follow on Professor Ndlovu, that, for instance, King Cetshwayo is communicating with Sekhukhune, right? Because they are facing a common problem, right? And even way before, I mean, there is evidence that these polities, and I think the best way really is to refer to them as polities, there is interaction. There are moments of military confrontation, but also there are moments of diplomatic engagement. So it's not as if these were the people who did not know one another. But even for these educated Africans who are clustered around these Christian missions, it's not as if these are communities or leaders that do not know one another and that are not communicating with one another. I mean, one of the interesting examples is that a significant number of them leave South Africa and go and study overseas, right?
In the USA.
In the US, and Scotland, and everywhere. Where does Charlotte Maxeke meets the man that she eventually marries? In the United States of America. Dube, goes with his wife to the United States of America. Others are going to Scotland. Some of the first black medical doctors. Sometimes I think, the first medical doctor in South Africa, I think he graduates in he graduates in 1874. Nembula is a student at the Chicago Medical School in 1870. So this is not as if
their lives are not crossing.
Their lives are not crossing, and they are sharing notes about the experiences of colonialism, that we are being dispossessed. And that is the reason why, when the idea came that they needed to come together, and I will explain, at least from my perspective, then why it becomes possible in 1912, for them to come together. In 1898, Walter Khubusane and some of his colleagues in the Cape Colony, for instance, they start an organization that is called the South African Native Congress, right? This is 1898. This is more than a decade before the formation of the Union of South Africa in 1912. But they are already thinking of an entity called South Africa. They call it the South African Native Congress in 1898. So that tells you the only way they could name an organization that way is because they knew that there were these other people in other places. They might not have formed this organization that they call the South African National Native Congress in 1912, but they knew that there are organizations that were existing. In 1900, these educated Africans, they start an organization and they call it the Natal Native Congress. The guys in the Transvaal are forming the same organizations. The guys in the Orange Free State are doing the same thing. In 1900, before the formation of the Union of South Africa in 1910. But there is something that is quite significant that happens just before the formation of the ANC. When white people decide that they are better off with coming together, and this conversation happens especially from 1907, when the Boers regain their independence. Because remember, the Boers lose their independence in May 1902 with the Treaty of Vereeniging, when the two Boer republics become the colonies of Britain. And that is given back, to them around 1907 or so. But they decide that actually we do need what then became the Union of South Africa in 1910. And then they have a national convention in Durban in 1909. And when they have that national convention, they exclude Africans at that convention. What do Africans do? They call their own convention. They call it the Native Convention to discuss that we have been excluded in our land. There is a discussion going on in the white community that will have a significant bearing to our own future, to our fate as a people. Our fate is being determined somewhere else, and we are being excluded. And so they convene this convention, and they call it the Native Convention. And when they are excluded further, they send a delegation in 1909 to Britain to plead their case. And when nothing happens and the Union of South Africa is established in 1910, it is quite clear that they need to do something, that they needed to unite as Africans. And that is where Pixley Semi, around that time, he's returning from being absent from South Africa for almost more than a decade. And he finds this situation where Africans are being excluded. And there are all these, there's this movement, in a sense, to bring about unity amongst Africans. So I know we are giving you a history in broad strokes, but
That's
I
the
think,
history I'm looking for.
I think it is a very important history.
I want to return to the house of chiefs.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to push Prof. Bongani towards the direction of the other social formations in the room. Because Prof ended where he says, in the house of chiefs, it's actually Southern Africa. And in many ways, the history you are telling doesn't arrive at the cultural melting pot that the City of Gold did to the Black experience. By the time the formation or the conversations of the Union happened, part of the war or part of the reason why white people are fighting is the control of the minerals.
Of the minerals, that is
But
true.
already this is a city and everybody is here.
That is true.
People from Mozambique, people from Zambia, people from Malawi, people from Zimbabwe,
people from
Namibia, and all of that.
That is true.
And there's nobody in that space for those 20, 30 years. Hence the chiefs that are gathering, who has a concept of South Africa and a concept of space that the whites have. The whites are actually very limited. Had it been the blacks who formed South Africa, it would have possibly arrived in Tanzania.
Possible. Definitely Southern Africa. What we know is Southern Africa today.
If the chaps in the room, okay, let me put it this way: the chaps in the house of traditional leaders. Let us say it's them who must say, "Is South Africa a border? It's the country C and I." Thinking about those characters, and you can help later on. Where would they have drawn?
Remember, by then, I did allude to the fact that the recruitment was from Southern Africa when I spoke about class issues then becoming prominent. Even if you think about our first trade union in terms of Kadali.
The industrial commercial workers.
Where is he from?
Malawi.
From Malawi. So for me, this is a Pan-Africanist idea. So Pan-Africanism doesn't arrive in South Africa with the formation of the PAC in 1959. By this action itself, remember also that we have a South African diaspora in Southern Africa by now. They originated from northern Zululand. They called Bongani. Where they are led by Zwamendaba. Some of them are led by Soshong and Ngakasa. And when he arrives in Mozambique, actually they are from the Ndwandwe group, not from the Zulu group. Actually it's a Ndwandwe diaspora, but it's from northern. So Soshang, when he arrives in Mozambique, they just change the S into a Z, which exists still today. We have the Gaza prophets, Then that's him. In Zimbabwe, we have the Ndebele. In Tanzania, Malawi, and Zambia, you have the Ngone. Who leads them is Zwankendaba. Where is he from? They're from northern Zululand, from the fact that Zwide and Shaba, they don't see eye to eye. And these ones decide that they can't stand up to this young upstart we live in, And these diasporas still exist even today. And then from the Free State, we have Barotse who live during the same time. And they are called Abdelozi today. But they exist. They are part of the diaspora, which exists. And to a large extent, this Pan-Africanism therefore makes it easier when you set up the House of Traditional Leaders in South Africa now. No, it's from there.
In 1912.
Yeah, because Seme, remember the founder of the ANC, he has traveled. So, so for him, it's an easier thing to establish. And is also linked to the Swazi monarchy, the reality. He works as an advisor to Kuswatan.
Yes.
So that is why I'm saying, therefore, it makes you think in the present when you think the issue about xenophobia and whatever. This is a movement that in its 1918 constitution, when it defines membership, it talks about Africans from the continent as part of the membership precisely because the Africans from Southern Africa who work in South Africa because of the economic migration, they should be part of the movement itself. So it's 19...
Because they have to defend any African from a racist assault. But let's go to first day. Something interesting, Bongani. Who is in the room and what are the debates?
It was on a Monday. It was a Monday. The weather, it was overcast in Bloemfontein.
So there were no holidays. I mean, why gala on the 8th of January?
Remember that...
there was no calendar yet. I don't know.
No, there was a calendar. Remember that...
Who is on the 8th of January?
Yeah, remember that Pixley wanted what we know as the ANC today to be founded in 1911, right? But just because there were a lot of debates, because what is coming together in 1912, partly are organizations that
were operating.
And that is partly the reason why it was so difficult to form the ANC. That there were these organizations that preceded the formation of the ANC, that had their own structures, that were political bases, of some of the people who were there in 1912. That is partly the reason why, one of the significant leaders at the time, John Tengo Jabavu, who was an established leader, did not come to the conference, to the founding conference, in 1912. I mean, because as I say, these are the people who have their own political bases that were being brought together. So the question you're asking me is, who's there? The people who are there mostly are leaders of the African people. These are the people who are formed at these mission societies who started these political organizations, who started the newspapers. Those are the people who are there. But there are also chiefs, and it links to what the Prof said, about the second house. Why were chiefs interested in the formation of the ANC, you ask? Because fundamentally, one of the biggest issues there was the issue of land dispossession. The Swazis who sponsored the starting of the newspaper linked to the ANC Abantu Bantu and basically gave the ANC some money to start the paper, they had lost significant chunks of land, some of which that land now is in South Africa, all the way to Ermelo. They've lost this land. So here is this organization that is being formed to deal fundamentally with two main things. Firstly, there is the issue of political exclusion, right? Mm-hmm. But also there is the issue of economic exclusion. At the heart of which is the issue of land dispossession. So these traditional leaders who attend this conference is because they have an interest in these two big issues. It is not just the educated elite. This is a struggle that affected every African because the issues at stake were quite fundamental and touched every African. And so when Seme issues a clarion call, in October 1911, he's addressing all Africans, not only in South Africa, because remember, these, what we call the countries now, Zimbabwe, Eswatini, Botswana, Lesotho, at the formation of the modern South African state, and Zambia.
And Namibia.
Yeah, and Namibia. The idea was that all of those countries today will be part of South Africa. In fact, when Alfred Milner started a commission in 1902, the South African Native Affairs Commission, to study what the native condition, he also included Africans in Rhodesia, in southern Rhodesia, what we call Zimbabwe today, because in his imagination, in the understanding, was that that would be part of a united South African state.
The three high commissions.
Yeah, the high commission territories, Botswana, Lesotho. The idea was that they will be part of a future South African state. That is the reason why when Cecil John Rhodes dies, 1902, he gets buried in what is called Zimbabwe today. Because even before he died, he never imagined that what we call Matabeleland will be outside of what we know as a modern united South African state as we know it today. So Africans from those territories too are interested in the formation of the ANC.
And they're in the room.
They are in the room. Because what is at stake is the very fate of South Africans that is being debated. It is not a small matter. Here is a group of people who have dispossessed us for over a century. More than a century. Who have decided to form this political union called the Union of South Africa. And when deciding to do that, they've decided to exclude us. What are we to do?
Let me then get in the internal matters now. We get the global view. ANC is formed, but there are interesting characters for the leadership question. I'm raising this because it's an enduring question throughout the existence of the ANC. Who leads the ANC and to what directions do they lead it? First president, before I go back to Professor Ndlovu, you have an interesting story. Because the characters, the people of the Cape are the most experienced in terms of
political
politics. They even have the franchise to some extent.
They have some of them have the franchise.
Limited, but they have the franchise. The franchise was already a limited franchise, I mean, within the white community.
That's true. Well, I mean, women, for instance,
didn't vote. White women didn't vote.
Did not
yes,
vote. That is true.
But sometimes as well, certain white people without, I think, education and property in some instances, the franchise evolved. But something happens in this room. These people can't agree on who should be
the leader of the
organization as they form it.
I mean, it was an interesting conversation and how it got resolved was quite interesting. I mean, the person who eventually got elected as the first President General of the ANC was not even at the conference itself. John Langalibalele Dube.
And keep in mind, Prof, I want to know why.
Yes.
You think Dube was not in the room?
No,
he'll take care of it. Okay.
John Langalibalele Dube is not in the room, and he's not even the most senior of this emergent political movement, the African nationalist movement that organizes itself in the form of the South African National Native Congress. He is a leader in Natal, of the Natal Native Congress. And when Africans decided to form what they called the South African Native Convention, which was in 1909, which was a response to the National Convention, they then elect a veteran, Walter Busa, from the Cape, in a sense a rival to Jabavu, to be a leader of the South African Native Convention. It would have been expected that when this organization then that brings together all Africans, that when it was established in 1912,
it would have been
Khobusa.
Yes.
Was president. Why then Khobusa did not become, or even Son Plaatje, for that matter? These are experienced leaders of the African...
Who have been organizing on a national scale.
Why then when Africans come together, Khobusa especially, given that he had been elected as the president of the South African Native Convention in 1909, he was the person who led the delegation of Africans that went to England in 1909. It was not John Langalibalele Dube. But then when the moment came, it was Dube who was elected president. What was going on? To answer that question, you need to go back to the political settlement that brought about the Union of South Africa. Because there was disagreement amongst white delegates who attended the National Convention that was discussing a Codesa, in a sense, that brought about, it was a Codesa.
But of the British and the Afrikaners.
Of the Afrikaners, of white politicians in South Africa who were meeting alone to determine the fate of all of us. There was a disagreement when it came to the political status of the indigenous people. And the disagreement was that you had limited franchise in the Cape. There were white politicians who got elected through the votes of those few Africans who were voting in the Cape.
In the Cape.
Yes. So it was in their political interest to keep
the franchise,
the limited franchise. These are people like John X. Merriman, like Sawa, and like F.S. Malan. These are politicians from the Cape, who are saying we need to keep the limited African franchise. White politicians, especially from the Transvaal,
and the Orange Free State.
From the Orange Free, don't leave out Natal.
And Natal.
And from Natal. And from Natal, who were completely opposed. Not only to the enfranchisement of Africans generally, but they were arguing for the removal of the limited Cape franchise itself. Right? And the compromise that was there was that let us postpone this question. Let each province keep what it currently has. And so in the Cape province, then they kept the limited franchise Africans. And that had significant consequences for what happened in 1912.
Mm-hmm.
Because suddenly, for these Cape Africans who had the vote, they say, our vote was kept there. It is there in the Constitution, and some of them pulled back. Right? And so
this, in your view, explains the absence of Jabavu.
That partly explains the absence of Jabavu. But
yes.
because it was kept, the gravity, the force of political gravity of black politics shifts from the Cape to the Transvaal. Partly because of the discovery of gold and diamond.
In the city of Johannesburg.
Of the city of Johannesburg, that is attracting all educated Africans to Johannesburg. And then they start political organization, right? But also because the Cape that had been leading for the decades prior to 1910, the Cape African elite, suddenly it says this, that our interest of keeping our right to vote has been maintained there. Some of them start pulling back. One of them who doesn't pull back completely is Khubusak.
Yes.
Because Khubusak sees himself as a national leader. By the way, there's a biography of Khubusak coming out soon by historian Brown Maba. It should come out around April, and he explains some of this. But Khubusak Same then starts organizing these meetings when he comes back here in Johannesburg that are planning for the formation of this organization. Khubusak is not attending those meetings. He's not attending those meetings because he leaves to accompany the king of Abatembu who went overseas for health reasons. So he's not around. So Seme becomes this central figure. And the guys who are attending the meetings, they are from the Free State. It's people like Sol Plaatje, the guys like Thomas Mapikela, Mocha from the Free State. But really the force of political gravity of black politics has shifted to Johannesburg and is led by these young people who come from all over. From all over. Same is from Natal, but we have people from all over who are here in Johannesburg. And so when the conference takes place in Bloemfontein, and why Bloemfontein? Because the Free State is at the center even of South Africa today, so it was easier for people from Natal to easily get to the Free State, from people from the Cape to get to the Free State, from people from Transvaal to get to the Free State. That is the reason why the conference is held there. But Seme, because he was concerned that this emerging unity should not fracture over who should become president, he proposes something quite interesting. He says, no, we should elect a committee that should work on who should become the first president general of this organization that we have established here. That committee should nominate who should become the first president of the ANC. And then 3 names. This committee brings together 3 names. One is one of the interesting leaders, is Tseu, who's brought in. Is Naisa, he is also put there, and it is John Langalibalele Dube. Now, Seme's relationship with Dube is quite interesting, especially for what happened just a few years after the formation of the ANC, because they fell out. But Dube had been instrumental in Seme going to the United States to study, going to high school in Western Massachusetts. And they came from the same mission, Christian mission, in a place called Inanda today. So they are Congregationalists. And so Seme is younger than Dube by a decade, but really he is quite close. They do not have a blood relationship, but there is a social relationship that they had. And so Seme did have an interest in Dube becoming the first President General of the ANC.
Was he in this committee that was supposed to decide?
He was the chair of the committee. He was the chair. Yeah. He was the chair of the committee. And that is the reason why then when the voting takes place, Dube he gets elected because he had been a deputy to Khubusane when the South African Native Convention was established in 1909, but he had been leading the Natal Native Congress. I mean, so he is a veteran in many ways. So it made sense that of the three people who were contesting for the position, that Dube was elected president, but he was absent. And the reason why he was absent actually was quite interesting because he had fallen from a horse.
Dube
he fell from a horse. He fell from a horse. so he couldn't move. So he couldn't move.
Yes.
So he couldn't go.
For help.
It's like everything was conspiring for that conference,
for
not
that
to have an outcome.
And for that conference, and by the way, when the conference started, a song that was sung there, it was a song that was composed by one of the, I'll tell you the name, I mean, and Sibongile Khumalo actually, give it, what's the name of that song? Give it to Africa. That was the song. That was sung. And it is interesting that song was, because naturally that song,
church song.
Yeah, it's a church song.
But written by a black person.
Yes, I mean, it was interesting because all of those present there knew the song, which goes back to that point that this was a group of people who knew one another. They might have been operating politically in different geographies,
yes,
but they knew each other. They were intermarried. And that is one of the other interesting things. I mean, it was an elite, an emergent class that was intermarrying, that was aware, which was sending its children to universities overseas. And
Prof, let me venture to extend now the conversation. I'll think this first period we can push up to 1940. For I think 1940, two important events conspire for that to really be a new chapter. It's like towards the end of World War II, which had defined, but also the world is getting restructured. Obviously, politics are going to get restructured. But what would you characterize then? The ANC is formed in 1912 to 1940. For you, what are the key moments, key figures, and the conditions of our people?
Yes, clear.
And I mean, this is between 1912 and 1940. There are literally two world wars.
Yes, can I talk about it? Versailles is also important. So, also, if Queen Mother Labotsibonu can belong up there, I think it's high time we have a female president in South Africa. But that's what we'll talk about right now.
Okay. So I'm happy you are coming to the party about the present.
So the 1920s are quite crucial. They are quite, not even the 1920s, the politics throughout the world. Then we'll talk about the issues about black on black and sibling rivalry, the Dube Seme, and then we'll also talk about Seme Kumete.
Yes.
But Seme is quite a rival figure generally.
And the state of the ANC in the 1930s. But what happens now? The organization is intellectual, intentionally intellectual. So which might not be the case. I'll explain why. For example, the Constitution itself is the 1918 is intentionally Pan-Africanist. The 1923 meeting makes it a point that the movement becomes Pan-Africanist. It is renamed. It becomes the African National Congress. It's no longer South African
Natives.
National Congress. The meeting also discusses the Bill of Rights. It's not
1923.
not in 1996. There are people who claim that the South African Constitution was written by whites because we sold out. No, 1923 discussed the Bill of Rights.
There's actually a document which the African Bill of Rights.
Yes.
Not just the Bill of Rights.
Yeah. And also, in that meeting, in the project I was doing for Prof. Ngqulunga, I discovered that actually it was not the committee, it was the ANC who started to discuss the idea of forming a republic in South Africa, in that meeting. It's a pity we don't have the minutes of those. But the Bill of Rights does exist as a document. I wished that debate. I was lucky it was covered by Ilanga newspaper of 1924. The issue that they were discussing, issues that have to do with becoming a republic. But then also the organization itself, as I said, it's intentionally intellectual. They become aware of the issues that are about progressive internationalism. Why do I say that? Through the Bolshevik Revolution, the Soviet Union is formed, and we're aware that, therefore, South Africa becomes part of that through the ANC. And the main leading piece in that respect was Josiah Skumete and Lakuma. And it ends up going to the Soviet Union. And in fact, Kumete even went to Georgia, and he went there with Stalin, as a test. So through progressive internationalism, then the issues about international solidarity comes.
Let me ask an initial question about this intellectual claim. Kumete is a bit late in the years.
That's the 1920s.
Yes.
Yes.
But in this intentional formation, with the account you were giving, both of you, about a defeat which was based on war.
Yeah.
These chaps have fought wars of resistance as soldiers.
Yeah.
But get convinced that to concentrate in the forefront now, a different kind of a soldier.
Of a struggle.
Yeah. A different kind of a soldier who is an intellectual. So are you, and here comes the big question then, where in the formation, in the beginning of the ANC, in the beginning years, a decade or two, let's say the first 20 years or so, where do you place the industrial worker?
No, I was going there.
Okay.
Actually, I was going to move there after, in fact. In fact, I did mention Kadale, so I was going there anyway. In fact, when we contextualize the defeat, we're not stating the fact that the Anglo-Zulu War for the world, it's not the defeat of the African. It's the defeat of the British. It is still the case even today. It is Impias syndrome remains an important marker in terms of history being taught in Britain. It's not the defeat of us, it's the defeat by Amazulu, where in terms of international politics then. I mean, the British have just defeated the French. They've defeated Napoleon at Waterloo. But they still can't explain even today how they were defeated here. And we know that even in the BBC, there's a Anglo-Zulu war industry. In terms of films, you know, Zulu war, whatever, there's so many even in that space. So it's relative. For us, we view the debate in terms of the defeat. The British see it differently up until this day.
But I mean, the institution of self-rules, the sovereignty,
that's what I'm saying.
Land and all of that.
That's what I was saying.
There certainly shouldn't be a debate.
That's what I'm saying. But in terms of
Yes,
context,
yes.
you know,
But after 1912,
then I'm coming in. Then, in terms of the labor history, then it's the formation of the black trade unions, African trade unions, because in their minds the conditions are bad, you know, and at the end of the day, the whites decide then to form themselves into a special group, who can say in terms of labor aristocrats. They don't recognize black workers. To them, black workers are enemy, you know. And then we have the rise of people like Clemens Kadali, and he forms the Industrial Commission
Workers Union of Africa.
ICU during that period in the 1921. The implications are that with the formation of that union, the ANC has to come up with a strategy now that the Communist Party exists. And even though when it was formed, it was originally a white union, but with time, black South Africans became interested towards the late 1920s. And the ANC had no option. But the relationship between the INCU and the ANC depended, you know, on, it's like, how does Kadali feel this morning? But there was a united front between the two. But, you know, it was unpredictable. But the organizations did work together because precisely for the reason that the leadership overlapped. It's not only now with COSATU and the Communist Party and the ANC now. The leadership overlapped from the beginning. From the beginning, that's when now you get the issue about the death of Johannesburg in 1930. You know, that march that was organized in Durban where he was killed, it was both ICU and ANC members who were part of it. Even though Albert Nzula by then, you know, was one of the leaders that left, he was in the Soviet Union and buried there, you know, because he passed away during the 1930s. If you look at his life history, you can see that it's influenced by both the national movement and also by the trade union movement. And that is when the Comintern then comes into space and come and introduce the idea of a native black republic. And that's when now, even though the membership overlaps between Kumete and Seme, they don't see eye to eye. And comes the election of Seme in 1930. And then I will leave.
No, I do want
because that tension.
I need to repeat some of these things from a different different angle. Two significant government changes Firstly, the franchise is taken. In
1936.
In 1936, we'll come to that. But much earlier, you've got the Rand Revolt. And you also have
coalition government in 1925.
Yes. How do these affect the African National Congress's evolution?
I think there is a contextual issue which partly touches on the question you raised before. The discovery of gold was a significant moment, even for the political organization of Africans. I think we should not underestimate that, because it did something, it's a sociological thing, actually, that makes the 1940s, 1950s significant and different from, say, the first 30 years or so of the ANC. What the discovery of gold in particular did, it forced the white authorities to force black people, to coerce black people to go and work in the mines. I mean, outside of that, I mean, the tax, I mean, the hard tax, the stock tax and all of that, that is a way of forcing, of coercing Africans to go and work, especially in the mines of Johannesburg. And so there was a small but significant urban black population, say especially after the First World War. And that is the reason why it was possible here in Johannesburg to have those strikes, labor strikes. I mean, it's because there are these black people now who are here in Johannesburg from all over the place. And some of whom, even though they came from where they came from, are increasingly seeing urban centers like Johannesburg as home. And that is the reason why the issue of racial segregation and the permanence of Africans in the urban centers becomes such a big issue in white politics. So much so that in 1923, Jan Smuts is forced to introduce the legislation, in a sense, that formalizes the segregation of races, I mean, in the 1920s. Why does that matter? Is that, in a sense, the ANC now has a big issue that even though it had started as an elite organization, but there is the presence of these industrial workers that you are talking about that they need to deal with. And what makes the question urgent is the formation of the Industrial and Commercial Workers Union in Cape Town, at the docks in Cape Town, but it moves in Johannesburg in the 1920s to organize black workers in the 1920s. And as Prof. Ndlovu said, it is started by a Malawian, Clemens Kadali, who fully participates, by the way, not only in the ICU, but in the politics of the ANC itself. The ICU by the 1920s, 1925, 1926, 1927, it is the largest mass-based organization.
Larger than the ANC.
Much larger than the ANC. Much larger than the ANC. And it is organizing, and in a sense, it is becoming a more authentic voice that articulates the aspirations of black people. I think we need to keep that. And yet the ANC continues, in a sense, to be an elite organization that does not mobilize people, and how it engages with white authorities through deputations. I mean, it sends its leaders to meet with this minister, to meet with Prime Minister Herzog. These are our demands, and that is said politely. But then we have this emergent movement, I mean, of workers. And the ICU starts organizing also in rural areas, right, in farms and everywhere. And so that is the context, in a sense, leading up to the election of Josiah Gumede in 1927 as the president of the ANC. Let us step back. So we said before, the first president general of the ANC is Dube. The second president general is Sefako Makgatho. He is elected in 1917 after a major political fallout in the ANC. The fallout actually is over something fundamental in a sense and also peripheral at the same time. It is over the policy position of the ANC towards the policy of racial segregation. There is a suggestion that John Langalibalele Dube, together with Selope Tema, who was acting Secretary General of the ANC because Sol Plaatje had remained overseas, after the 1914, that they have written a letter to the APS, what was it called? It was the African Political Society in the UK, supporting segregation. And so Seme, who had become, in a sense, an opponent of Dube, he says, how can a president general of the of this African National Native Congress support segregation? Which was really not true. The argument of people like, especially Selope Tema and some of the early African nationalists was, if white people insist on segregation, let them be fair about it. They must divide this country down the middle. We Africans are not afraid to govern ourselves. We Africans are not afraid. If you segregate...
You just said that like it's really a noble idea.
No. But remember remember the vision of segregation that white politicians have is that they will take everything and then they will shove Africans to a little ghetto.
So what is to divide it in the middle?
No, they were saying do it fair. If you want territorial segregation, right? Because remember that segregation in practical terms came in two forms. It was territorial segregation and it was institutional segregation. Territorial segregation in the sense that white people should stay in their own area, the most fertile, the most productive, the most convenient areas. And then Africans should be shoved to some unproductive land. That was the first thing. And then institutional segregation was that white people should have their own institution of governance and representation. They must have a parliament in Cape Town. They must vote. Africans should have their own advisory bodies and some...
but what was Dube's argument? Let's hear this argument.
So the argument is, if white people insist on segregation, that the races in South Africa must be apart, let that be done fairly. That was the argument, especially of somebody like Tem, especially Tem in particular. He says, if the idea is that there should be a segregation of races, we Africans are not afraid to govern ourselves. But that principle should be done fairly. It means then Africans should be given sufficient land and sufficient resources to literally govern themselves in a serious way. And given that Africans were about 80% of the population, it means then what is allocated to them must reflect the demographic reality of South Africa.
So this is what splits.
This
is the first split of the ANC.
This is what then causes the issue. And then Seme, supported by Richard Mangena, who was the Treasurer General, supported by the guy after whom Kwamaimai was named, to tell you now, who was the editor of the newspaper at the time. I'll come now with the name it's being. They say no, but that is problematic. For us is the unity, is the territorial integrity of South Africa. It leads to a major debate, especially in 1916, 1917. So Dube and Selopetema are forced to resign. They resign. Dube left the ANC before his second term ended. So they resign from the leadership. And so the next, Sefako Makgato is then elected to become the second President General of the ANC from 1917 to 1924, when Makgabane becomes the president.
But at this stage, what happens to Dube? Does he go?
Dube, but he...
Maybe at this stage we will take a small break, but and drink water and all of that. But just complete for me the first split.
Yeah.
Dube and Selopetema resign.
Yeah.
They are forced.
And
in a way.
Polokwane is still far.
No, you are taking Polokwane. They're
still far.
They're still Seme and Kumete.
We're still going there.
We're still going there. And Polokwane is not even there. There's no Polokwane yet.
Remember,
there's no place.
But I mean,
possibly, was it there already, Petersburg?
No, we are
no, it is Petersburg is part of the Transvaal.
We are conscious.
Yeah, but is it there as a place already?
That is where Petersburg is there. That is where Selopetema is born just outside Petersburg.
That's a hook for readers now because they know Polokwane. So now we're telling them that that's east. We have to
complete. Dube and Selopetema.
They are forced to resign.
We know Mangena and Seme remain.
Was it
with Makgato?
Yes, that was Sol Msane that I was talking about.
With
Sol Msane, who after whom this hostel
of my
because those people will be coming from injured. from the mine. He was a manager there, compound manager. So they will come injured. He will say my. So he then got called my.
Sol Msane, but
yes.
The chaps remain. Yes. We'll come back to them.
Yeah.
Before we take a break, where does Dube end up together with Tema?
They did not leave the ANC. Remember that Dube is the President General of the ANC.
But they get forced to resign as leaders.
As leaders of the... Remember that Dube is President General of the ANC, but at the same time he is President of the Natal.
Of the Natal, yes.
He has his political base. And that is what, by the way, creates problems. People talk about the ANC of Natal, but actually it was not. It was the ICU of Natal by A.W.G. But we'll get to that. But they did not leave the ANC. Tema was a leader of the South African National Native Congress in the Transvaal, in the province itself, right? So the fact that they left the national leadership of the ANC,
they remained
as provincial leaders, as leaders, attended its conferences, prominent leaders of the ANC.
All right, now clarify the A.W. champion question.
No, that's another thing.
Yeah, I just wanted, because part of this is just for people to know a bit about the history of the ANC. I wanted just to mention the presidents up until 1940.
Then
we'll get to that.
We will do that as an opening line
in the
to the second.
Champion will come. Will be
now. I think the important thing to mention about A.W.G. Champion is that he also comes from Natal and then he works in the mines. When Clement Kadali, who had started the ICU, the Industrial and Commercial Workers Union, he sees that not only is the political gravity of African or black politics, not only has it moved to the Transvaal, but also the economic gravity is here now. So it decides to expand the reach of the ICU that had started in the docks. I mean, it was basically for dock workers. So he opens a branch in Johannesburg. And one of the people he appoints to start organizing these industrial workers here in Johannesburg is a fellow called Alison Wessel's champion, George Champion, a very charismatic, but I suppose populism in a sense, you could say, you could say it all starts with A.W.G.
It starts with him.
It starts with him. But, and so Champion joins. He joins in 1924, and Kadani sees the potential of Champion, and he sends him to Durban to open a branch. There was Maduna there, but really, and this is significant because when Champion moved to Durban, he started mobilizing and brought in like mass following to the ICU. But there were questions about his management of funds, especially of the ICU. And there was an attempt, he was suspended because there were claims that he had misappropriated funds. And so when he was suspended, and because most of the money of the ICU came from membership dues, I mean, from Natal, especially Durban, where he was the organizer, he could not accept being suspended. And he, together with his followers, started split from the national organization and formed what became the ICU Natal.
Thank you. I think that's a good point. There was never Ukongolose Natal. Yes.
There was never the ANC of Natal, although Dube. Although Dube. So when the decision is taken in 1923 to change the name of the ANC, so it is then decided that this change must be reflected also in the names of provincial organizations. So the Natal Native Congress should no longer be called the Natal Native Congress, right? It should be called the Natal African Congress. Now, there is a conference in Pietermaritzburg in 1924. Dube is being contested by Chief Mini, Stephen. And Dube is defeated at the conference in 1924, and Dube couldn't take the defeat. But in a sense, this Natal Native Congress belongs to him. Couldn't. Because remember, the political split in Natal was between those who were from the coast and those who were from the inland, Pietermaritzburg, Edendale, and those were from and Dube and Luthuli later on, they came from Durban, I mean from the coast.
The coast, yes.
Right? And so when Dube is defeated by Stephen Mini, he did not want to accept the outcome, the electoral outcome. He said the voting had been rigged. And so he refused to collapse the Natal Native Congress. So you had Stephen Mini leading the Natal African Congress, and you had Dube continuing with the Natal Native Congress as if it had not ended. It was a split that went all the way to 1945. But we'll talk.
Let's take a small break.
We still have a semi in
Yes.
We still have a semi.
Yeah. Thank you so much.